Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great start to their morning. Yeah, this is one of the few times that I decided to show up this early. Actually, the idea was to try and do this one, yesterday evening, but yeah, I just got caught up with work. I just got, let me yeah, just got caught up with work, daily life came in the way. So I decided to do it like right now. Um, yeah, the idea is to try and cover a few topics every week, which are, interesting. They sort of impact the lives of Canadians daily. It's not something I I like the macro stuff that happens all over the world, but the macro stuff it takes about it actually it might take months, even years for it to sort of trickle down to everyday life, like normal life, just going to work, coming back, paying your taxes, going to sleep. you know at that level, it just takes a little bit of time for policy to trickle down, so that we start feeling the impact. So, yeah, guys, without further ado, welcome to another episode of Narad News. Let's get started. Today, we'll discuss the Canadian EV dream, which seems to have, well, frozen up just in line with the weather all across the country, except Greater Vancouver area. If you live around here, it's actually been phenomenal weather for the past few days. No, well, not for the past few days, but overall, this winter has just not been that bad. You expect a lot more gloominess, or just a lot more rain. So yeah, here this is an opinion piece that came out of the Toronto Sun a couple of days back. So that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole on what's been happening lately, because I've actually looked at maybe getting an EV as my next car, but it's a tough choice just because my car is doing just fine. It does not have any issues. It is at this point about 11 years old. If any of you wanna know what that car is, etc., if you wanna know more about it, then you could go watch my live on buying a car in Canada. I actually took the car that I have and compared the price from 11 years ago in the US, in Canada, and like now the price of that same, pretty much the same vehicle today versus in the US. So that was also very eye opening. So yeah, coming out of that conclusion on just how much prices have increased, and now seeing all this news around EVs and EV mandates and all the good stuff that keeps coming out, I'm now seriously thinking, maybe I go for a hybrid, or maybe just stick to an ICE. So without further ado, let's quickly go down. So basically, it starts off with a pretty interesting remark. For heaven's sake, can we just admit the painfully obvious point that Canada's federal and provincial governments committed a massive strategic blunder when they went whole hog into subsidizing the production and sale of EV vehicles and batteries, right? So let's look at what case the article is trying to make, and it points out to all these write downs, shutdowns that are happening across the Canadian auto industry. Now, for those of you who are not from Canada, you may think, okay, I've never seen a Canadian car on the roads. What's the Canadian auto industry? Well, most of it is auto industry that assembles and makes cars, but with basically US company branding on it. And then they get sold across Canada, across the US, of course, and then across the world even as needed. So, true, Prime Minister Mark Carney made the right decision last week to abandon the impossible to achieve EV mandates of his predecessor, that would have started this year requiring 20% of all new cars in Canada to be EVs, rising to 60% in 2030 and 100% in 2035. My argument flat out, and for anyone who's been following this channel for long enough knows that, that's a no-no. The government doesn't get to decide what type of car I should buy. If the market is offering options in the ICE space, in the hybrid space, which has just hybrids or plug-in hybrids or whatever, and then fully electric space, I should have access to all the possible options. And then I can decide what to do with my money. So I'm glad to see that the EV mandates are gone, and it's literally a need of the hour. And I'm gonna go into why it's absolutely ridiculous for a country like Canada to be advocating EVs to no end. Look, I'm not against going off fossil fuels eventually. I just think that a lot of technologies come and go. They have their summers, their heydays, and then they have winters, and then they have a revival. In fact, EVs have seen an EV winter from the 1920s to the 1950s. Then there was revived interest mostly in Europe till the 90s and the early 2000s. Finally, you started seeing a Toyota Prius on the block, which was a hybrid vehicle. That's one of the first EVs that came out in the new EV era, at least the affordable ones. And of course, the Tesla Roadster, right? Those were the new age EVs that were highway ready, and they were ready to take on more stress than the previous ones, and the ones that were coming out all over Europe, which were good for internal usage, not so good for external usage, but they were there. In fact, GE as early as the early 1900s was looking at making EVs. There were electrical vehicle cars for the longest time. It's just that the ICE technology caught up, kept pace, and then outpaced the innovation in the battery space. Now, as a component, the battery exists even in an ICE car, right? Without a battery, you cannot run a vehicle, especially with all the modern technology we are used to seeing: flashy touch screens, Bluetooth connectivity, plates to charge your phone, etc. So you need a battery for that. But the thing that the ICE does is the propulsion of the vehicle, the moving forward, backwards of the vehicle is controlled by, an internal combustion engine, which in turn also, in I guess a non-plug-in hybrid, also then keeps the battery charged up, which then powers all the electronics around the car, right? So you cannot have a car without a battery. And EV relies on one source of power for propulsion and all the ancillary behavior that happens in a car. In that sense, it does act as a single point of failure. Now, there is a lot of redundancy built to ensure that doesn't happen, but essentially you are, from a technology perspective, from a base technology perspective, you are relying on one piece of technology to ensure that your car propels forward and has all the electronics functioning. There is regenerative braking, but that braking is used to charge the battery. So if the batteries itself have failed to a significant extent, then you will not have good propulsion. And that's what we see happening with EVs. There are limitations to battery technology that make it absolutely, not compatible with the Canadian winters and frankly Canadian distances. This is the second largest country in the world. You can assume that, let's say, 3/4 of it cannot be inhabited, right? Let's assume that above Edmonton, you have nothing there. That's not true, but I'm just making a rough estimation on, just up to about Edmonton, you have like 90% of the country's population, if not more, right? Even then, the weather, the climate is very, very harsh, as we have been seeing throughout this winter season on how badly, Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, all these provinces have been hit by cold winters. We are in that one lucky lagoon, in southern BC, which does not get as much snow just because the mountains protect us. But you go out into interior BC, it's still pretty cold, right? So the efficiency of the battery at the current level of technology, it just drops in cold weather. A battery essentially is a device that has to hold electrical charge in some form or the other. It has to be able to store electrical charge on one side of the battery, symbolically speaking. And when you use it, that charge is then equalized to the other side, which releases energy, which is then used for anything. In the case of an EV, to propel it forward, to power your AC, to power all the other electronics, the swanky touchscreen, the door mechanism, the window mechanism, all of that relies on battery power. And all of that relies on, transfer of electrons from literally one side of the battery to the other. And that process itself releases energy. That is a symbolic representation. Electrical engineers will probably throw a fit in the comments. I would love it if you actually did that. But that's essentially how an EV works. Now we'll just go into some high octane closures that we have been seeing. It looks like there is a cash incentive revival, which used to be $5,000 for EV buyers, and then billions of dollars in additional support for Canada's struggling auto sector underscores a simple reality. Look, if you're not able to sell something for such a long time, so the Tesla Roadster came out in 2012, and I think we started seeing all the other Teslas on the roads, I would say, I guess, mid 2010s. They came on the scene big time. And then Toyota Prius was a thing when I had started attending college in the US, my undergrad. So that was about 2010, 2011, that time frame. And you would see, Toyota Prius being talked about a lot. So if after, let's say, 15 to 16 years, since this technology has caught everyone's attention, there's innovation happening, and if people are still not buying it without an incentive to buy them, that means it's not standing up to the expectations of the people who are going to drive these cars, right? If my ICE car, it can let me do a quick calculation, guys. Okay, here's the calculator. So my ICE car on one tank can go up to about 330 miles. So that's about 520 kilometers, right? But the thing is, it will basically give me up to about 480, even in the worst of winter climates. Of course, I'm not going to drive my car in -50. It's just not designed for that. But again, -50 depends. It does not have the right tires, so I won't take it. But with the right tires and everything, I could take it in the winters of Alberta and still drive it, right? Is it the best choice? No. But if I'm just driving on a highway in Alberta, I'll do it, right? Because I know the snow is going to get cleaned up and everything. But as far as the weather itself is concerned, the fact that it's very cold outside does not impact the range as much as it would impact on an EV. And we'll get into that shortly as well, right? So again, looks like the incentive to buy the EV, $5,000, they're back. So if you really want to buy one, you'll get 5,000 off. But again, you have to remember, you're literally paying almost double to get an EV, or at least maybe at least 50% more. And then you'll have to think about, okay, does the economics make sense? Because every 10 or so years you'll have to replace the EV battery. It's not going to last that long, right? On Friday, Stellantis bailed out its joint EV battery Nexstar Energy project in Windsor, selling 49% stake to majority partners South Korean based LG Energy Solution for a nominal $100. I'm almost wondering if this is a typo. I mean, this has been officially published, so I'm guessing it's, they kind of edited this, but for $100, like, seriously. Let's go to some more interesting stuff. Stellantis shares dropped 24% on the NYSE. Simultaneously announced a 26.5 billion write down on its EV investments. 26.5 billion write down. Like, I want that number to sink in, everyone. This is where we are truly with the EV technology. I have nothing against the cars, right? I've driven a Cybertruck. These are all test drives, but I've test driven a Cybertruck. I've test driven a Model Y. I've test driven a Lucid. I've even test driven, some regular EVs like the Volkswagen one, and I have nothing against a particular brand or anything. All I'm saying is they accelerate fast. It feels fun, and I'm not one of those engine noise files that I need that sound. If the car accelerates fast, I like it. I enjoy that feeling. But still, if the car is not gonna be able to, since I live in Vancouver, I'll just use this reference. If I cannot do a round trip to Seattle and back, roughly speaking, in one tank or in one charge, then I know that an ICE is just a better bet for me. Assuming I do that trip often enough, blah, blah, blah. There are other factors, but all I'm saying is that's the bare minimum I would want my car to be able to do, in terms of quote unquote a long drive, right? Because you're bored in Vancouver, okay, let's just go to Seattle, maybe get, I don't know, just let's look at the American version of British Columbia, I don't know. You just want to change your surroundings. Seattle is just a convenient spot. Sometimes if you have to go to internal BC, your Whistlers and whatnot, your car needs tires, there's snow, the highways have traffic. You don't want to deal with all of that. Fine, I'll just take the I-5 down south. Right? That happens. Let's look at another one, guys. The Justin Trudeau government and the Doug Ford Ontario government earmarked up to $15 billion taxpayers' money in incentives for the $5 billion plant, which was completed last year and remains in operation. So this is again around the Stellantis plant. But now that has the one where the majority stake has now been sold to the South Korean company. Or 49%, so that's non-majority. But anyway, I don't know how that deal works. I haven't looked at the details. Let's go down. Last month, GM, also subsidized by the federal and Ontario governments, announced a $6 billion write-down on its EV operations, warning it may post additional EV-related losses later this year. So GM's, and then similar story with Ford with a much heftier write-down. So that's this is in the same region of where Stellantis has ended up. US $19.5 billion write down on EV production lines after years of trying and failing to make them profitable, saying it would shift its focus to gas powered and hybrid vehicles. Right? So overall, the confidence in EVs has just failed to pick up. It could just be that there is so much noise around EVs, there's all this slop that comes out that, oh my God, I bought this EV and now it got stuck in the snow. Well, your ICE can also get stuck in the snow. If it's a simple front wheel drive, it's not going to be able to do much in like a foot of snow, like half a foot of snow or something. So there is a lot of exaggerated news that could have sparked this trend. But I also think there is also credible, word of mouth instances that have traveled in the population enough to, substantially hold people from buying the EVs. Maybe one too many bad experiences have reached people's ears, and that they're trying to just be like, okay, I'll just stick with an ICE for now, or maybe go for a hybrid. I'm not against hybrids either. Like, another option on the block is obviously the hydrogen fuel cell cars. The good thing with them is, again, they separate the propulsion of the vehicle and powering everything else. While the engine still is responsible overall for everything in the car, the battery basically acts as a backup, so that if your engine, whatever fuel that engine is using, if that stops working, at least your battery just has enough juice for you to be able to get out and get a mechanic, or step away from the vehicle if it's about to burn or something, right? So just having those two components separate basically helps increase the efficiency of the overall performance of the vehicle. It does not put too much stress on just one method of powering throughout the car, right? Now let's look at this from a macro perspective, especially with a Canadian lens on, right? So let me pull that up. Yeah. So I think everyone has seen this at this point. Everyone understands this, right? So this is Worldometer. And this is basically telling us oil reserves by country 2025. So pretty updated data. It's not going to get much newer than that. Number 4, Canada, 9.24% oil reserves in the world. Look, I'm not going to say that stop EVs to the extent that there is some case that they do help the environment. I have not read the literature in detail on how these batteries are disposed, and that's where some of these big question marks come from. But for now, let's assume the story at face value, that EVs help protect the environment. Sure, keep innovating on it. Don't force people to buy technology that is not good enough, because especially in a country where you have an abundance of these reserves, right? Why do we not see $1 a liter in Canada? 4th largest oil reserves. We could literally be offering oil not only at a cheaper price to Canadians, but also to so many other countries in the world, right? Especially because the top 3, Venezuela, okay. Saudi Arabia, fine. Iran, always controversial, Canada has the black gold that the world still runs on, whether anyone likes it or not, right? We should take advantage of this economic opportunity. We should take advantage of it, funnel the money back into the country, into innovation on other technologies, right? Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I mean, everyone knows Canada has a lot of oil, but I'm just trying to show you in terms of just where do we rank. We are not 10th, we are not 11th, and we have literally half a percentage of the world's population, 40 million. If US is about 5%, then yeah, just it's a quick back of the envelope calculation. So like 42 million people, man, we could be living life king size over here. And then simultaneously just allowing people to innovate on other technologies, right? No one is saying get rid of all EVs. I'm not claiming that. We just had a deal with China on having more Chinese EVs come into the market. That could be for different reasons, but at least we are not given up on the dream yet, which is fine. I don't want to completely abandon EVs just because we have so much oil, because one day we'll run out of it and then we won't have a backup plan. So yes, it's definitely good to have a backup plan, invest in public infrastructure which runs purely on electricity, encourage people to maybe buy EVs by not restricting their choices, allow everyone to compete, but use what you have. Now let's look at some of the the issues that EVs have in Canadian winter. In a perfect world, all electrical vehicles would be driven in 23 degrees Celsius weather with no wind, rain, or snow, and on perfectly flat roads. Unfortunately, those conditions are rare in Canada, where temperature rise and fall within a matter of hours, and perfectly flat roads, well, that's a mere dream. Which is true. Like, okay, flat roads, fine, but the temperature fluctuations are just massive. Right? You can start a day feeling like you just need maybe a thin jacket or something, like a thin sweatshirt or something, and then by the evening it's like, man, why don't I have a thicker jacket and a toque or a beanie, whatever you call it, on your head? Where are my gloves? And even in Vancouver you feel all this. So I lived in Toronto for a short while, so I know what the author is talking about, and anyone who lives in Canada knows what the author is talking about. I don't think this is news to any of us. It looks like they used a 2023 Genesis GV60 as their guinea pig. But basically, I just wanted to talk about using HVAC while driving an EV cold weather. While driving an EV in cold weather. Fan speed 1. And again, this is all Genesis GV60. So it's reading about 436 kilometer of a range at startup when the temperature was -5. You're going from 407 and then you go all the way down. If it's just blasting within the car, it's 350. Okay, auto is a reasonable choice, about 396. So you are at about 400 kilometers of a range. All right. Compared to what I just spoke about my ICE car, which will give me about 480 to 500. So that's 25% more, right? In about any weather, in about any temperature. So if it's, and even like -5 can happen even in Vancouver. It's not unheard of. It'll happen. Like I've seen a couple of days when it's gone down to -16. Just this year we kind of got lucky, but it's definitely not unheard of, right? So basically, if you're running a fan at full capacity in the GV60, you've lost roughly 86 kilometers of range, which is about 20%. Realistically, the fan speed will probably stay somewhere in the middle. So let's assume speed 3 for most drivers in winter, but even that is still 46 kilometers of reduced range, or around 10%. So at the very minimum, you are saying that you will lose 10% of your efficiency. Coupled with the fact that when you have to charge an EV, it's minimum 30 minutes. I think Tesla supercharger tells you that, okay, 20 to 80 in about 20 minutes. But that's still slower than what you could potentially do at a gas station, which is you just go fill up and leave, which could be about a 5-minute exercise tops if you really wanted to condense it. Okay, on average, 10 minutes, but that's still half of what the best supercharger facility can give you, right? So overall, I think, okay, I'll move this off the okay, how do I get rid of this, guys? Okay, yeah. So overall, I think everyone gets my point by now. Is there's nothing wrong with keeping a technology progressing. Sure, let's invest a little more money, maybe a little with a little less enthusiasm. But sure, we definitely need an alternative. why don't we start considering hydrogen fuel cell more seriously? Right? Does it have to be that the alternative way to power a car has to be through a battery? Can a hydrogen fuel cell car basically achieve all the aims around sustainability and still provide us that decoupling of propulsion and the functioning of everything else in the car? Non-propulsion, if you will. And if we can achieve that with a hydrogen fuel cell, does it still make sense to continue pushing for EVs, especially in a country where we are sitting on world's like close to 10% of oil reserves? So bottom line is Canada has runway and options provided it makes economics first again. And I'll go back to that expression again and again. As long as we keep economics first, at least for the next couple of decades, we will recover from the last decade. We will also just end up with more sensible and reasonable policies, and we will end up with more choice for all consumers, which is a win-win for everyone across the spectrum, whether you are liberal, whether you're conservative, whether you are anything else. It just makes more sense to have a variety, to be able to pick and decide where your money goes. With that, guys, signing off for the day. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you guys soon in another live. Hopefully, keeping fingers crossed, tomorrow.